There are certain things that just don't happen in professional tennis. A president doesn't clear his evening schedule for an athlete. A head of state doesn't send a car with diplomatic plates to a hotel at midnight. The Élysée Palace doesn't set a table for two in its most historic room for a 20-year-old who hasn't won a Grand Slam yet. Those things don't happen. Except that on the night of May 23, 2026, in Paris, on the eve of the French Open, every single one of them did. And the person at the center of it was Alex, ranked 38 in the world, exhausted from a transatlantic flight, about to climb into bed, with absolutely no idea that the most surreal night of her life was roughly 15 minutes away. To understand how a tennis player ends up in a limousine heading toward the most famous address in France at midnight, you have to understand what the weeks before that moment had already looked like. Because by the time Alex arrived in Paris, the story of her arrival had already started writing itself without her permission. The airport alone was something. Thousands of people. Filipino flags packed so densely they looked like a single rippling sea of red, white, and blue. The chants that had followed her from Rome and Melbourne and Madrid were there waiting for her in Paris too, bouncing off the terminal walls, filling the arrivals hall with a sound that felt less like a welcome and more like a declaration. She hadn't won a match at Roland Garros yet. She hadn't even checked into her hotel. And already the city felt like it belonged to her. That's the thing about the Eala effect that's so difficult to explain to someone who hasn't witnessed it firsthand. It's not manufactured. There's no PR campaign behind it, no carefully orchestrated brand strategy, no team of consultants deciding which moments to amplify and which to downplay. It's just real. It's the product of a person competing with such complete honesty that people who have never picked up a racket feel personally invested in whether she wins or loses. By the time she got to Paris, that investment had spread well beyond the Filipino community. French fans had adopted her. Tennis fans across Europe who had watched her push through the Italian Open were following her trajectory. Journalists who usually reserved their column inches for the top 10 were writing features about what she represented. The French Tennis Federation had already honored her with a medal before the tournament began. The tournament hadn't started and she'd already been given a medal. That's the kind of arrival it was. But underneath all of that, she was tired. The flight from Mallorca had been long, the media obligations had stacked up fast, and the emotional weight of carrying 40,000 traveling fans and the hopes of 110 million people back home is not something you can fully prepare for no matter how mentally tough you are. She had done the interviews, done the practice session on court 7, smiled for the cameras, said the right things. And then she had gone back to her hotel, ordered room service, and was about to sleep when her phone buzzed. The message was from her agent. Don't go to sleep. Someone is coming to see you. She had no idea what that meant. It was almost midnight. She pulled on a sweater, ran a brush through her hair, sat on the edge of her bed, and waited. The second message came 15 minutes later. Come downstairs. Alone. The lobby of the hotel was quiet in the way hotel lobbies go quiet late at night, a few staff members moving softly, the lighting dimmed to something between functional and atmospheric. She walked through it, nodded to the concierge, pushed through the front door, and stopped. At the curb, engine running, sat a black limousine. Tinted windows. Diplomatic plates. And on the door, unmistakably, the seal of the French Republic. The door opened from the inside. A voice from within was calm and direct. Miss Eala, please get in. The president is waiting. Now, picture that moment for a second. You are 20 years old. You left home at 13 to chase a dream that most people quietly doubted. You've spent years grinding on clay courts in a country that wasn't yours, eating alone in restaurants where you didn't speak the language, rebuilding yourself from the ground up every time the losses threatened to define you more than the wins. You came to Paris to play tennis. And you are standing on a Parisian sidewalk at midnight staring at a car flying the seal of the French Republic. Alex looked back at the hotel. Looked at the light in her mother's room on the upper floor. Looked at the city of Paris spread out behind the car. And she got in. The drive to the Élysée Palace through the empty streets of Paris at midnight is probably about 15 minutes. 15 minutes to process the fact that you are about to meet the President of France in the middle of the night on the eve of your first round at Roland Garros. 15 minutes to wonder whether any of this is actually happening, or whether the exhaustion has produced some extremely vivid and specific fever dream. The palace itself, when the limousine passed through the iron gates, looked exactly the way you'd imagine it would look at that hour. Lit in soft gold, the French flags moving gently in the night air, the courtyard stripped of its usual daytime energy and left with something that felt closer to ceremony. An attendant opened the car door. A senior aide greeted her at the entrance and told her the president had been looking forward to this all evening. She was led through corridors lined with 300 years of French political history and brought to the Salon d'Or, which is where France hosts heads of state for formal occasions. Crystal chandeliers. Frescoed ceilings. The kind of room that is designed from the floor up to communicate power and history and the weight of the decisions that have been made inside it. And in the middle of all of that, one small table. Set for two. Emmanuel Macron was already standing when she walked in. He crossed the room immediately, hand extended, and the first thing he said was her first name. Alex. Thank you for coming. I know it's late. I know you have a match tomorrow. But I couldn't let you begin this tournament without telling you something. He was not what she expected. Whatever version of this meeting she had been constructing in the car ride over, the formal version, the political version, the version where she sat across from a head of state and tried to remember how to conduct herself in the presence of that kind of authority, that version dissolved almost immediately. He was direct, but he was warm. He asked questions like someone who had actually been paying attention. He told her he had watched her matches in Rome, not just the tennis but the crowd, the flags, the particular quality of the atmosphere that surrounds her wherever she plays. He told her he had spent decades in politics, had watched movements build and leaders emerge, and that he had never seen anything quite like what she had created simply by competing the way she competed. And then he said something that she wasn't prepared for. He said, what they call the Aya effect, it isn't an effect. It's a revolution. And France wants to be part of it. She asked what he meant. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim folder. He slid it across the table and told her what was inside. A cultural exchange program between France and the Philippines, funded by the French government. Scholarships for young Filipino athletes to train in France, to access some of the same resources and infrastructure that had shaped her own development when she was grinding through her early years in Europe. A pathway for kids who had the talent and the fire but not the means. A door that hadn't existed before. He told her it would be named after her. The Alex Eala Scholarship. Her hand went to her mouth before she could stop it. He told her calmly and clearly that this wasn't a political negotiation. There was no deadline, no pressure, no expectation of endorsement or public alignment with anything he stood for politically. He wasn't asking her to become a politician. He was asking her to keep being exactly what she already was. To keep fighting on the court. To keep letting her people feel the pride of watching her wave that flag. To lend her name to something that would tell every young Filipino athlete who came after her that their dreams were not too far, that the path was possible, that someone had already walked it and left something behind for them. He told her the program would exist regardless of her answer. The French government was committed to it. But having her name on it, having her blessing, would change what it meant to the people it was designed to reach. She sat with that for a moment. And then she said, I never asked for any of this. I never asked to be a symbol. I just wanted to play tennis. And Macron said something that landed quietly but hard. He said the best ones never do. He named Mandela. He named others who had carried the weight of symbolism without having sought it, who had been chosen by circumstances and by the people around them rather than by their own ambition to represent something larger than themselves. He said the world had chosen her, and the only question left was whether she would accept the responsibility that came with it. He was careful to say that accepting didn't mean transforming, didn't mean becoming something other than what she was. It meant staying exactly herself, because exactly herself was already more than enough. The food arrived at some point during all of this, and the conversation shifted, became lighter, more personal. He asked about Manila, about the journey to Mallorca, about what it felt like to be 17 in a foreign country speaking broken Spanish and trying to convince a famous academy that you deserved a place there. She told him. He laughed in the right places. He told her about leaving his own hometown at a young age for Paris, knowing nobody, having nothing except belief, understanding in the way that only people who have built something from the ground up can understand what that kind of solitude feels like and what it eventually produces in a person if they don't quit. They talked until 2 in the morning. The head of state of France and the 20-year-old tennis player from Manila talked for 3 hours in a room built for kings and emperors, eating a meal that neither of them was probably all that hungry for, finding something genuine in the space between their completely different worlds. When it ended, Macron walked her to the limousine himself. His security detail kept their distance. At the car door he told her, "You have already won. Remember that." The limousine pulled away. She watched the palace disappear in the side window. The city moved past her in the dark, the Eiffel Tower sparkling somewhere in the middle distance, and she sat in the back seat holding a slim folder stamped with the seal of the French Republic and let herself cry. Not from sadness. From the accumulated weight of everything. From what the week had already been before this night and what this night had just added to it. From the gap between the girl who left Manila at 13 not knowing whether any of this was actually possible and the woman sitting in a presidential car at 2 in the morning in Paris having just been offered a scholarship program in her own name. She thought about the KFWs in the stands. The nurses and caregivers and engineers who had built lives far from home and come to Paris on their own savings to wave a flag for someone who looked like them and competed like them and refused to shrink the way the world sometimes quietly asks you to shrink. She thought about what a scholarship program named after her would mean to a 12-year-old in Manila, who had seen the flags in Paris and started to believe that something that had once seemed impossible might not be. She thought about her mother upstairs in the hotel, almost certainly still awake, almost certainly praying, waiting for a knock on the door. The limousine pulled up to the hotel. She thanked the driver. She walked through the lobby. The elevator took her to the 5th floor and she knocked on her mother's door. Riza opened it immediately. The chair she'd been sitting in was still warm. She had been there the whole time. "What happened?" her mother asked. "Are you okay?" Alex crossed the room and held her. She told her everything. The salon, the table set for two, the folder, the scholarship program, the name on it. She told her what Macron had said about revolution and responsibility and what the world chooses for you when you compete without pretending. Her mother's hand went to her mouth at the part about the scholarship. "The president of France offered you a scholarship program with your name on it," Riza said, and Alex nodded with tears running down her face. And then she said something that her mother would probably carry for the rest of her life. She said, "Mama, I already know the answer." Yes. Not for me. For them. For every Filipino kid who ever dreamed of something they couldn't see a path to. For every person who crossed an ocean to build something better and never felt properly acknowledged for what that cost them. For everyone who stood in those stands and chanted and waved and made me feel like I wasn't alone. She wiped her face. She looked at her mother in the way that 20-year-olds look at their mothers when they suddenly understand something about the size of the life they are living. "This isn't about tennis anymore," she said. "It's about legacy. And I want to leave one." The next morning, her team released a brief statement. It said nothing specific. It simply noted that Alex was focused on the French Open and that any announcements regarding off-court activities would come after the tournament. But in Paris, whispers travel fast. The French media had already started piecing together what little had leaked from inside the palace walls. The Filipino diaspora, which didn't have the details yet but had an instinct for when something significant had happened, was already celebrating in the quiet way communities celebrate when they sense, without being told, that someone who represents them has just been acknowledged at the highest level. And Alex walked onto court the next morning carrying a secret that sat differently than pressure does. Pressure pushes down. This lifted. She had come to Paris to play tennis and had arrived at the start of her first round carrying something that no opponent could take from her and no scoreboard could measure. The scholarship program would be announced after the tournament, win or lose. The French government was ready. The details were in place. The only thing left was the tennis, and she had always been good at the tennis. What this story is really about, though, underneath the dinner and the limousine and the presidential seal and all the details that make it feel like the kind of thing that gets adapted into films eventually, is something smaller and more important than any of that. It's about what happens to a person when the world reflects back to them the full size of what they've actually done. Alex had been competing for years. She had put in the invisible work, the kind that happens before anyone is watching, the early mornings and the lonely evenings and the losses that shook her confidence and the doubts that didn't fully go away even when the results improved. She had carried the weight of a nation's hopes with a grace that made it look easier than it was. She had stood up in a press conference in Paris and told 30 million people the truth about what the sport was doing to the athletes who made it worth watching. She had inspired people in ways she was still discovering, still hearing about, still processing. And she had done all of it without asking to be a symbol, without designing herself as a movement, without calculating any of it in advance. The dinner at the Élysée was the world's way of saying it saw all of that. Macron had said it directly, with the weight of a nation behind him. The Eala effect is not an effect. It's a revolution. And France wants to be part of it. There's a specific kind of recognition that matters more than trophies. Trophies measure what you did on a particular day under particular circumstances. They measure excellence in a bounded context. What Macron was offering was recognition of a different order. Recognition that she had done something that transcended the sport, that the way she competed had changed how people thought about what competing was for, that the flags and the chants and the tears in the stands were not just the accessories of a successful sporting career but the evidence of something genuinely rare. The fact that she was 20 years old made it more significant, not less. Because at 20 you haven't yet learned all the ways the world teaches you to protect yourself from the fullness of your own potential. You haven't built all the walls yet. When something this large comes toward you at 20, you either run from it or you walk into it completely, and Alex, standing in that hotel room at 2 in the morning with her mother's arms around her, chose to walk into it completely. The French Open would play out in the days that followed. Matches would be won and lost. The tournament would eventually crown its champion in the usual way, with confetti and tears and a trophy held above someone's head on the red clay. But the legacy question, the one that Macron had placed on the table in a slim folder with the seal of the Republic on its cover, that question had already been answered. She said yes to her mother at 2 in the morning in a hotel room in Paris, and that yes would eventually become a scholarship program that would carry her name long after the rankings had shifted and the results of the 2026 French Open had faded into the footnotes of the sport. The kids who would one day benefit from that program, the 12-year-olds in Manila who would fly to France on a scholarship because someone decided to make that possible, most of them would not have seen the press conference where she told the WTA to stop talking and start paying. Most of them would not have been old enough to watch the Italian Open in real time. But they would know her name. They would train on courts she made accessible. They would follow a path she built. And when they competed, when they carried their own flags onto their own courts in front of their own crowds, they would be doing it on ground she cleared for them. That's what legacy actually is. Not the moment of recognition. Not the dinner or the limousine or the presidential handshake. The ground you clear for the people who come after you, the doors you open by walking through them yourself,